What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was banished and turned into the god of vengeance? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto Uzumaki was a rather simple human being. He hated vegetables. He loved ramen and the color orange. He wanted to become the leader of his village one day. Simple wants, nothing too ambitious. He didn't want power for the sake of just having power. He didn't aspire to become God, unlike many of the opponents he had faced. He was a good-looking person. Spiky blonde hair, cerulean eyes, lean body packed with muscle, and 3 symmetrical whisker marks on each cheek. He cared for his friends, and would ensure that he would survive alongside his friends. So how had it all come to this? This was the question he asked himself, as he assumed he only had a couple seconds left to live. He was lying in a white space, with another person near him. The other occupant was a female, with white hair, pale eyes, a third eye that was currently closed, and a pair of horns. This was Kaguya, a supposed goddess of his world. She was also pondering a question. How could one with such bonds with his people? A selfish human, one who had stolen her chakra. How could he throw everything away just to stop her and her plan for true peace? How could he throw everything away, and still not kill her when he had the chance? He could have, provided he had let a more powerful version of the move he had used on her, maybe the one with the blades attached to it. He had certainly had his chance. She had been distracted by Indra's successor interrupting her as she had tried to separate Ashura's successor from his companions. She had been preparing a portal, her surprise had destabilized it, becoming a gateway to oblivion. It would shred any existence to pieces, and then dump them on a world devoid of any life. She guessed this was why Ashura's successor had acted when he did. Flashback. Gra. A flash of orange streaked across the sky, circling around a woman with white, back-length hair. She had pale, pupil-less eyes, as well as a third red eye with rings and tomo on the reins. The woman was dressed in a regal kimono, one suited for a princess. One of the sleeves was torn, revealing she had lost an arm. This was Kaguya, also called a goddess. She pointed her remaining arm, taking aim at the orange object, before firing one of her own bones, an all-killing ashbone, towards it. As soon as it detached from the palm of her hand, it blurred out of sight, becoming invisible as its speed reached its zenith. The orange spark in the sky turned right, narrowly avoiding the bone, while also hurtling towards Kaguya. It dodged another bone, before barreling past the goddess as she swiftly dodged. The orange object skidded to a stop, revealing it to be a young man of 17 years of age, with glowing hair that was normally blonde, with 2 clumps that now resembled horns. He was dressed in a strange, orange glowing outfit, symbols covering every inch of his clothes. Normally cerulean eyes were now also orange, with a cross-shaped pupil. This was Naruto Uzumaki. Damn it! He panted, hovering in midair, as his mind raced to come up with a way for him to defeat the god before him. Unfortunately, he was drawing blanks. He leveled his eyes at his opponent. Quote. He scanned the surroundings, searching for something. Someone. People. Still don't see Kakashi-sensei or anyone else. Damn it, I guess she really did catch me with one of those portal things. Soon after he and his comrades had taken the arm of Kaguya, she had begun teleporting herself and them to many different spaces. Except now, she had singled him out. He had been holding his own for quite a while, but it had been mostly him dodging her attacks, while his own strikes never landed. She always seemed to know what he was going to do next. Wiping the sweat from his brow, the Uzumaki gave a small and exhausted laugh. I guess she isn't called a god for nothing. He couldn't really gain the upper hand, and he hadn't heard from the Sage of 6 Paths in a while. He was really stuck in a position with no advantage available to him at all. And yet he could not lose. Everyone he cared about was counting on him. He refused to let them down. Super Gramps, I really need a miracle here. He leapt to his left, avoiding a barrage of Kaguya's bones. He crossed his fingers, 20 clones of himself appearing behind him, throwing up their hands as large spheres with blade-like attachments hovered above their hands. Rasen Shuriken Barrage. They let their attacks fly all at once, and watched as they hummed through the air. Kaguya merely extended her hand, preparing to blast the chakra attacks away, but before she could, a portal similar to one of her own opened up in front of her, as a teen with black hair and a red eye and lilac eye with reins. He was Sasuke Uchiha, transmigrant of Indra. One hand was used to keep the Rasen shurikens at bay, while the other was fumbling to try and stabilize her escape route. The Rasen shurikens faded away though, as through the smoke they left behind was blasted away as Naruto hurtled towards her, batting her hand away and used the other to launch a Rasengan into her gut. He knew it wouldn't keep her dazed for long, and noticed how she had tried to avoid entering her own portal. So he did the one thing that a person as impulsive as he was thought would work at that moment. He tackled her inside. Flashback end. He could feel it, the way that the very air around him seemed to want to rip him to shreds. That his very being there was never supposed to happen. That this place was slowly killing him. That Kaguya was also experiencing the same thing. Why? He turned his head, meeting the enraged gaze of his divine neighbor. She was glaring at him, the goddess who was trying to end the world, was staring at him incredulously as if he was the one who had tried to doom humanity. Her eyes hardened further. Why did you just throw away this world's last chance at true peace? His eyebrow cocked, as his mouth fell wide open. Excuse me? Her face was marred by a grimace full of hate and despair. How could you doom the world? Wait a second, what? The blonde Uzumaki stared right back at her. The hell do you mean how could I doom the world? That was you doing the whole world dooming. Not me. Ignorant human, are you really so blind? She spat. Those other humans you left behind are just going to continue the bloodshed that they have enabled for all these years. I'm trying to save them. The hell you were. He shouted back incredulously, you tried to mind fuck all of us and turn every human into your own personal Zetsu army. That ain't peace. They would be living a lie. They would have been happy. She shot back, they would have fulfilled their every want. They would have had all their wishes come true. She took a breath, that would have certainly been better than the blood-soaked reality they belonged to. Kaguya's features morphed into pity, and now they'll be forced right back into that reality. And kill each other all over again. Silence. Silence reigned throughout the space, as both occupants felt their senses becoming more and more dull every second. Naruto looked up into the blank sky. It was just white, blank, and soon he wouldn't be able to see even that. He had stopped arguing with Kaguya, simply because he couldn't anymore. He was tired, exhausted after his many hours of fighting, and didn't want to spend his last moments arguing in some dispute. At least he could pass knowing that everyone back home was safe. Even the Biju within him couldn't find it in themselves to speak, as their chakra was also being ripped from existence itself. He sighed, as it appeared that the rabbit goddess had decided to begin another berating spree. You humans can't Eve. He stopped her, holding out his arm towards her, his hand forming a fist. Super Gramps taught me that way to use chakra. The way it was supposed to be used. I think he called it ninshu. Or something like that. He elaborated, still looking ahead of him. I don't know why you did what you did, and I can't agree with it either. But maybe I can understand the person behind it, at the very least. He finished. The goddess stared at the appendage with wide eyes. In any other scenario, she would have ripped it from his body and burned it. But she hadn't seen Ashura's successor so solemn. She had observed her opponents, and he had always been energetic. But these were both of their last moments, and she was a bit curious why he had destroyed her plans for world peace. She reciprocated the gesture, extending her remaining arm and tapping her hand against his. Soon, each of them was filled by every single one of the feelings of the other, connected by their chakra. Naruto felt as if a cold river had run through his entire body, a lingering chill still finding its way through his body. Her chakra seemed cold, but weighed down. Burdened in a way, weighed down by responsibility and sadness. Sadness knowing that the ones she sought to protect were killing one another for petty things like money. Watched as her lands were ravaged and her people were killed. Watched as she was sealed by her ignorant sons. Reawakened, only to be thwarted as her chakra was eliminated from the world, ending the infinite Tsukuyomi, and lay slowly fading away next to the one responsible. Kaguya felt as if the sun's rays were being poured over her, as if her whole body was being bathed in comforting, warm water, relaxing her entire body. His chakra was bright, and so warm. And it contained an accepted and reformed darkness. His happiness at his accomplishments and friends. His hatred for being mistreated. His sadness for being unable to do anything as his grandfather figure, his godfather, and his friend died. A final flash of pride and longing as he sacrificed himself on a slight hunch, leaving the future of his world to people he trusted. A realization that even for all the things she had done, he did not hate the woman lying next to him. And so the two experienced one another. Their hopes, their dreams, and they experienced it with the acceptance of the dying. He pulled back his fist, cutting the connection. The cold disappearing from his body as her chakra seeped back into her. Kaguya felt as the warmth left her body, leaving behind a longing. How could he not hate her after all she had done? That, Ninshu, her son had discovered. It was an interesting experience. Pure, unadulterated, understanding. This was the legacy she had wanted to leave, but her son had come up with a way for people to do it in seconds. He had intended for people to use it for understanding. She had come to know everything that was Naruto Uzumaki, and the reverse was true for him, as he came to know Kaguya. She understood him, and him her. It was wonderful. She looked at the transmigrant of Ashura. His will to live was strong. She was a relic of an age long past, who had tried to destroy the future he had worked so hard for all his life. She could feel that the last of both their existences were nearing their end. Maybe, the young shinobi heard the shifting of dust, looking over to see an alabaster fist. He followed it with a confused look, before his breath hitched as he saw her face. She was smiling, a gentle smile, one full of acceptance and knowing. And for the first time, despite all his time fighting her, he now saw her as beautiful. He was slipping away any second now, so what did he have to lose now? He once again tapped his fist against hers, and as soon as contact was made, his eyes widened. A torrent of power entered him, a massive amount of chakra entering his system, refilling and refreshing his chakra coils. It was massive, powerful, and full of so much life. He looked to her and her haunting smile, and returned it with one of his own, trying to help her as she helped him. He could see the white around them shifting, as they neared the end of the warp. The floor faded, as a world was revealed. It was brown, barren of any life. The sky was dark, as night reigned in the sky, the moon in all of its surreal beauty glowing softly in the sky. He felt his vision fading, his body falling limp. He noticed they were getting further and further apart. And yet she was still smiling. After giving him so much of her chakra and life to him, she still hung on long enough to smile still. She looked weak. It was in that moment that Naruto truly realized that even a god could be vulnerable. That a god could die. His body stopped moving. His vision faded to black. He felt his body touch earth. And then he fell into slumber. The barren world continued to spin, even though there was no purpose to it. It could not grow plants, it could not sustain animals. It couldn't preserve life, until a large and potent energy seeped into its soil. Powerful, dense, potent. An energy with remainders of a will. Chakra. The energy had a host, and had adapted to him. But his body was still recovering from something that should have destroyed his very soul. If it continued to reside within him, it would destroy him, going against the wish of its previous host. So it sought an escape. It poured into the soil around it, a mixture of his own chakra, the Biju residing within him, his life force, and Kaguya's gifted chakra. And the world accepted this gift generously. It let the energy mold it, letting it do as it pleased. The energy's host would surely die in this kind of barren and lifeless environment. And so it went to work. It tapped into his knowledge of senjutsu, drawing from the poor, almost pitiful reserve of energy from the planet. It was enough. The soil became fertile, tiny saplings forming and beginning to grow from the newly formed soil. It drew upon the life force of these saplings next, as well as the planet, shaping its chakra into a living form, and using the life force it gained to form flesh. Soon, the planet was teeming with animals. But there was still something missing. The energy tapped into its host, drawing forth his powers over nature, creating clouds, using his latent ability to mold the ground itself to draw the lava from the earth, using his main element to form air. Soon, the clouds began to rain, forming puddles, then pools, then ponds, rivers, lakes, oceans. The planet was now able to self-sustain. And yet the energy was not yet done. Only 5 days had passed. It knew its former host had wanted the new host to live his life, but he was a very social creature. He would be sad if he was lonely, and its former host didn't want him to be. So it set out on a new duty. But it was tired, and the will it was given was fading. So once again, it relied on its host as a base, using the last of its will to give life to intelligent creatures. It gave itself to his emotions completely. From his overwhelming compassion and love for his fellow man, white feather-winged sentinels were born, created with a will to protect. Born with a will to help those around them, as well as having had created a code to be as pure as their creator. A realm all to themselves, as heavenly as his ideals. From his inner darkness, one of the winged sentinels was different, with wings of black and bat-like in origin. Born from his experience with the darker side of humanity. It had no purpose, so it gave into its baser emotions. Lust, gluttony, greed, and the list continued. It created its own dwelling with its primordial power. It manipulated others, turning them into beings much like itself, perverting them to fit its twisted ideology. It was everything its creator was not. From his overwhelming belief in choice and that humanity was capable of great things, the energy used him as a model for the first humans to take their first tentative steps. Though, a special few developed talents of their own, in order to hold their ground in this world. Soon after, another winged sentinel inherited his creator's belief in choice much like the humans, but struggled to restrain himself in order to uphold his race's code. But he let his inhibitions go, and he fell from his place of birth and was placed among the humans, his wings dyed black. He would be the first of those called the Fallen. From the primal and untamed energies of the Biju within him, yokai and other supernatural creatures were born. Some chose to live among humans, while others hated them. Some were close to the human form, while others were bestial. They were among the most mysterious of the life new to the planet. It was the dawn of the seventh day. Its deed done, the remaining energy settled down, forming a protective shell of earth around its host, and laying down measures to ensure his awakening. It had taken up a role helping guide the winged sentinels who watched over the humans with suggestions using ninshu, becoming a small reminder in the back of their minds. However, some of the strongest of the sentinels were more in tune with this connection, hearing it louder and more clearly than their brethren. They revered it, delivering its message in a more direct manner, and in turn spreading it to the humans. The energy settled down, as the planet was satisfied with its work. And Naruto Uzumaki truly rested. All was well for a while. But as is, with the power of choice, conflicts arose. Blood was spilled for many reasons. But those reasons were all the same to the earth. It grew resentful, hateful, disgusted with the blood seeping into its veins. And so, it cut itself off from all the races. It tried to, at least. Some of the races had inherited their creator's talent with nature and senjutsu, accessing its power. And so these races felt the hatred and wrath of the world itself. Its rage became theirs. Their minds became lost while they accessed the power of nature, and so it was soon a taboo to practice. Only a select few would the world allow access to this power. And still the bloodshed continued at a rapid pace, as the races slew one another and soon became enveloped in a great war. More blood, too much blood, and so the planet took a page from the mysterious energies hosts experiences. It created a monster in hopes of peace. And once the creature was sealed away, the bloodshed ceased. The races became tired of the fighting, the loss, and the death. For a time anyway, the energy the earth had known for so long finally spent the last it could afford in an effort to help. It had dissipated after all these long years. And so the earth lost its will, leaving behind hatred. And so the earth kept spinning, as one person kept sleeping in stasis. Michael was troubled. He was a handsome man, with golden hair and blue eyes, features that he shared with his sister. In fact, most of Angelkind had this look. He was fairly tall, standing at a rough 6 feet and 3 inches. Dressed in ceremonial robes that were common garb for his people. Something wasn't right. Sitting in his throne in heaven, the archangel had been feeling uneasy ever since a few weeks ago. He hadn't felt this troubled since he and the other archangels had stopped hearing God's voice after the Great War. After they had assumed God had died. They had felt God's energy help in the sealing of the beast of the apocalypse, Trihexa. Once the sealing had been completed, it had dissipated slowly, and soon after had they heard no more from the Lord. From that day forth, God's voice had disappeared. Every trace of their Lord had vanished in the blink of an eye. The only thing left behind were the 9 great temples that had erected during God's passing. They were a mystery to the world, with each one having grand designs of a different great beast, which were later dubbed the sacred beasts. Each one residing in a remote area, away from all human contact and influence. They labeled the temples in order of these beasts, for their number of tails varied. It had become a custom for angels and high-ranking members of the church to go on a pilgrimage to these temples, starting with the first temple of the Ichibi, and finishing at the final and ninth temple of the Kyubi. The Kyubi, Ichibi, and the second temple's sacred beast the Nibi were among the only recognizable figures in their world, being what seemed to be a tanuki and a kitsune, but much of the others were mysterious combinations of animals. The third temple's sacred beast was a mixture of a turtle, shrimp, and other sea life. The fourth temple's was a combination of a monkey and a lizard, which was depicted as being able to control lava. And the others were just as bizarre. Each beast had its own power, though they all shared the ability to form massive amounts of destruction with what was called a bijudama. The Ichibi was depicted to be able to control sands and winds. The Nibi, a cat wreathed in flame, had control of the fires of hell itself, turned blue as the flames were made its own. The Sanbi had control over the seas and manipulated coral. The Yanbi its lava. The Gobi, a mix of dolphin and horse, its steam and strength. The Rokubi, a slug, its acid and bubbles. The Nanabi, a flying beetle-like creature, its various powders and flight. The Hachibi, a combination of bull and octopus, had control of ink, as well as power over lightning. The Kyubi, being a fox-like creature with strange ears and human-like torso and hands, had the power to sense the negativity in people, as well as having unparalleled strength amongst its kind. These places were full of energy. Not holy energy. Not light like he and so many others would have suspected. No. Instead, these temples were filled to the brim with an energy that only certain types of yokai had access to. Chakra. It had been a recent development, but lately large amounts of the energy had been leaking from each of the temples. And each of these temples' energy felt unique. He lifted a hand to his face, muttering in discontent. He had been the first to discover the chakra coming from the temples. Only back then, it had been such minute amounts that he could barely feel them at all. And now, it was taking some of the best barrier specialists and sacred gear wielders the church had to prevent each temple's energy from escaping and becoming like a beacon to some of the less desirable people in the world. It was potent, that much he could tell, especially the temple of the Kyubi. That particular temple had been radiating more energy than many of the other temples put together. There was definitely something more to that particular temple, but he couldn't put his eye on it. Brother, he was snapped out of his musings by a sweet and quiet voice, his hand leaving his face as he looked towards the newcomer. Gabriel, standing at a respectable height of 5 feet and 8 inches, his sister and fellow Archangel Gabriel stood there and gazed worryingly at her brother. 12 wings folded behind her and taking the appearance of a single set. Her face was beautiful beyond what most mortals could describe, but not in a lustful way. Her features were gentle, caring, and pure. However, her body was the exact opposite, with outrageous curves that betrayed the innocence her face portrayed. Her hair was the same shade of gold as her brother's, as well as possessing the same blue color for her eyes. She was wearing the same type of clothing as her brother. What worried him was the uncommon seriousness that she held herself with. Michael's eyes softened at the sight of his sister, as he put on a small smile and sighed in realization. With the latest developments and my being restless, it has been making you worry, hasn't it, sister? He didn't receive an answer, as it wasn't needed. He understood what she felt, they were siblings after all. They didn't need words. He noticed her grip her right hand to her left arm, her face contorted in uncertainty. Yes, brother. But that's not the only thing. He saw her take a breath. I believe that I heard Father's voice. Michael's eyes widened, as he took in what his sister had revealed to him. He stood from the throne, making his way to his sister, and gently took her hands into his own. He met her uncertain gaze. Are you absolutely sure? This wasn't a matter to be taken lightly, even as childish as his sister usually was. She would never joke of such a thing. Even she had thought the father had died. She had always had the strongest connection to their father, second to no one. Even he couldn't compare to his sister when it came to this matter. And when God had stopped talking and they assumed the Lord had died, she had been affected the most. She stared into his eyes, a look of certainty in them. Yes, I'm sure. It definitely felt like father. How so? Her brother questioned. She took hold of her brother's arm, leading him through the grand hall the throne was located in. At first, it was hazy. Hoarse, like someone who had been in the desert. Her voice grew louder, as she spoke with more fervor. but it grew stronger, except it wasn't really a voice, it was more of a feeling. Michael's expression lightened, glad to see that his sister was getting back to her usual self. It felt like waking up. But weird, like you've been asleep for a really long time, and don't want to be up, but you're up anyway. Her eyes lit up, her tone becoming more and more excited, and then it grew. But slowly. She put a finger to her chin, it still is I think. She returned to her usual happy expression, but it definitely felt like father. Michael nodded, closing his eyes and searching internally for his connection with God. He went deeper and deeper, searching to the very ends of himself and his energy. His face lit up, a large smile overtaking his usually serious expressions, as he hugged his sister close. A lone tear going down his face. He felt it, he felt God. He felt his father, even if it was ever so faintly. Gabriel returned his joy, reciprocating his hug. The largest smile she had ever had spreading across her face, as she finally felt certain that her connection with her beloved father was back. The celebration soon ended, as Michael once again questioned his sister, dropping his arms to his sides as his features became serious. "Sister, you always were stronger when it came to contacting the Lord. Do you think you might be able to?" He was cut off, as in he received an emergency order from the Vatican. Lord Michael. An elderly man's face appeared upon a floating screen, directly in front of him. Dire news. Michael held his hand up. "I'm sorry, but it will have to wait, I'm discussee." He was interrupted by a strong gust. Shielding his eyes, he looked over to see his sister taking off and flying away with great speed. Gabriel. He didn't receive a response, as she instead sped out of sight. Lord Michael. He turned to the screen, barely restraining himself. It's the 9 great temples. They're experiencing a great influx of energy. The barrier specialists and other members can't keep up for much longer. Confusion flooded through Michael, as he tried to pinpoint his sister's location. The worst of it seems to be coming from the temple of the Kyubi, Lord Michael. The priest warned, all the barrier specialists have been unable to keep up. The temple's energy is too potent for us to go much closer than necessary to rescue them. We've managed to get them to treatment, but their injuries are severe, and the temple is still leaking energy. The temple of the Kyubi. But that's, he widened his eyes, realization coursing through his mind. That's where Gabriel is heading. And so, he too took flight. The temple of the Kyubi was perhaps the most grand of its fellow great temples. It was taller than its brothers, wider, and filled with much more depictions of the beast. An earthquake rumbled the temple's foundations, and yet it seemed calm on the inside. The carvings of battles long past and people long forgotten now seemed to come to life, moving with the vibrations. But the sharp cracking noises could be heard. Rocks fell from a carved stone depiction of the Kyubi, as if it were trying to escape. Everywhere else a temple was located, it was much the same. The energy was becoming too much for the church members to handle. They were driven back, forced to abandon their positions, lest they be overtaken by it. As a result, most of them now stood in solitude, as they were in remote locations to begin with. Earthquakes and energy spikes plaguing them, as well as all of the stone carvings of the beasts falling apart. As if alive, landing lightly on the tips of her feet, Gabriel the Archangel stood before the temple of the Kyubi. She gave a worried glance backwards, as on her flight to the temple, she had seen the people who had been touched by the temple's energy. They had all suffered from burn-like wounds that wouldn't heal, despite the church's best efforts, from what she had noticed. She glanced up, staring at the moon in the night sky. She faced forwards, looking upon the temple in question, before resuming forward. Before she could be afflicted by the energy, she covered herself in a miniature shield of light, as it seemed to stave off the energy from harming her. She stared at the grand entrance to the temple, wide and Roman-like in appearance, resolving herself to venture forth. She stepped inside, noticing that the earthquakes had stopped not long ago, but pieces of the temple were still shaking. She looked all around her, noticing that the carvings of men in battle seemed to fight, using the elements and various other techniques. All of them aimed at strange, plant-like men and a floating character. She continued her trek, her golden locks bouncing with every step. She soon entered the temple's inner recesses, seeing the grandiose throne before her, made of stone, the stone carving of the Kyubi looking as if it was protecting it, tails wrapping around the room. Crash! She stumbled, as she felt the energy spike, and she received a message from the security the archangels had placed at the other temples that they had access to. Each one was crumbling, but that wasn't the surprising part. The most surprising and pulse-pounding fact was that in each of the other 8 temple locations, she could see them. She could see each of them. She witnessed each sacred beast in all of their full glory, roaring upon their release. And they all looked directly in one direction, towards the 9th temple. Each sacred beast began to move before they disappeared from view. The message screens disappeared as she saw another person enter the temple. Gabriel. It was her brother, his face looking worried and his breathing erratic. Gabriel grabbed hold of her brother as they steadied each other from the quaking. Brother. Did you also see th? Yes, he said, the sacred beasts are real, and that they are heading for this temple. His features full of concern. The priests are doing their best outside to heal those afflicted by this temple, but they aren't making much progress. Before they could converse any further, they were interrupted by the sharp sounds of stone shattering, as they looked to the throne in the center. As it also began to crack. But that was the least of their worries as they witnessed something. The single, glowing red slitted eye that was finally free from the stone carving behind the throne. More stone shattered, each time revealing more and more of the reddish-orange fur beneath it. The throne also resumed cracking, revealing it to be hollow to a certain extent. Michael covered himself and his sister with his 12 wings to protect them from the falling debris. And then they heard the roar. As both brother and sister looked up, they witnessed the Kyuubi finally break free. It roared, flexing its tails and body, raising its head high. Soon, other roars were heard, and added on to create this cacophony Michael and Gabriel were now of witness to. The other sacred beasts had arrived, and each one of them wielded such overwhelming power. If the beasts turned hostile, Michael had little doubts that both he and Gabriel would last long. The stone finished falling off of the stone throne, as the sacred beasts circled around what remained of the 9th and final temple. The Kyuubi itself wrapping his tails around it protectively, much like it had in its carving form. They turned their heads, and in turn their eyes, to the throne before them. Sitting upon a much smaller rendition of the throne, sat a young man, his body slouched over. Upon his shoulders hung a red and black haori, covering his upper body, while also giving access to his mesh armor-covered torso. The young man was tan, and seemed to be at 5 feet and 10 inches. Lean muscle like that of a trained swimmer all over his body. Energy seemingly pouring from the sacred beasts came to him, filling the air around him, as the beasts watched over him with eager eyes. The oppressive energy ceased, being filtered through the young man. His blonde hair swayed in the breeze, being held up by the tattered remains of a headband. 3 symmetrical whisker-like marks rested upon each cheek. Finally, the sacred beast stopped roaring, silence reigning over the night, as the young man began to stir. His breathing became even, his shoulder made slight movements. Mumbled. Finally, and slowly, his upper body lifted upwards. Looking straight at the pair of archangels, blue eyes slowly opened. And with the last of her courage, Gabriel managed one simple word. Father. He remembered nothing but white. Endless, all-encompassing white. He remembered her, the person he had come to know as the god of his world. A god who sought the destruction of everything he had known. He remembered his sacrifice, his final act of defiance against what could have been considered divine providence. He regretted none of his actions, as long as the ones he cared for were safe. He would defy fate once more and would not relent. He remembered the endless expanse before him, seeing the fallen goddess looking as weak and frail as he had. He remembered what death had felt like in its bid to claim him. He could hear it laughing as its claws slowly sunk into him. Then loosen in pity as it realized what his fate truly was. His life and existence were not to end. They were to be erased and were to fade into the white. He remembered his acceptance of his last moments as he sought to understand. He remembered her hesitance at his proposal and her eventual answer. And so he used his power. Not for hate, not for conquest, and not for vengeance. Instead, he used it for understanding. He remembered her rage. He remembered her sadness. He remembered her smile. With that, he forgot his rage. He forgot his sadness. He gave a smile in return. And he offered redemption. He remembered drifting away. And then he remembered nothing. Amen. There were voices. Voices that were not his own, nor did they belong to the tailed beasts he had come to call friends. He could feel the voices. He could feel their joy. He could feel their hope. He could feel their fear. He could feel their pain. All crying out to him, yet not him. He could not think. He could only feel. Emotion at its rawest. A part of him understood, but that part didn't feel quite right. It didn't resonate as naturally as did the rest of his body. Foreign, autonomous, and holding on to knowledge he was not yet privy to. It knew what to do, and yet without him it could not do so. He understood the voices, but they were fleeting, and there were many. Some stood more prevalent than others were more silent and sincere. Yet, he could not fathom why. Dear Holy Father, I thank you for this day. Please God, don't let me lose her. Father, I'm scared I'm not enough, that I will fail, please give me strength. Forgive me dear Lord, for I have sinned. I have healed one who ha. And just like that, the voices began to fade, gone as soon as they came. Erratic things they were, for the things they spoke to him were of the usual variety. Yet as soon as they were spoken, the other part of him would steal them away, take their meaning from him, and he would only feel what they had left behind. Although, there were some exceptions to this. Whereas the normal ones would fade with time and become alien to him, 12 voices aside from the masses would speak and let themselves be known to him. These 12 often spoke to him, mostly on matters of guidance, mostly showing their utmost reverence. They were special, that much was recognized. The 12 felt familiar. Each time one of their voices flared in his mind, it was brighter and clearer than the others that mobbed his mind, and he could tell which of the 12 the voice was. They had identities, personality. But even among them, one was special and held favor with him. Imprinted on his subconscious mind with such compassion and love that he would not dare forget her, nor confuse her for another. Her voice was the loudest amongst the 12, along with the most cheerful and the kindest. Every time her voice was heard, he could feel the unadulterated joy in her heart that she felt by just knowing she was reaching him. Sometimes it was the usual prayer, other times it was just her chattering away and offering bits and pieces of small talk. She was special because she was willing to treat even those she respected normally. She was special because she was willing to always use kindness first and force last. She was special because she was his favorite. But even she could only stave off the rest of the voices for so long before she was drowned out by the others. Dear Lord, help me. I'm not sure how Dad gets this praying thing right. And so, even if he had no idea what he could do for them, he felt in his heart he had to try to help. He had to do something. Anything. Such was his compassion for his fellow man. So he stretched out his power, felt it welling up inside, being restrained with only his restricted thoughts, and released them. For those who felt joy, he felt joy. For those who felt hope, he gave them resolve. For those who felt fear, he gave them courage. For those who felt pain, he gave them solace. He could not move, his eyes were clouded, he was drifting along somewhere, but where he did not know. These acts were the limits of what he could do without the other part of him that understood what was going on much more than him, apparently. When he first started hearing the voices in his subconscious, he felt tired. Exhausted. Weak. Just like he had felt in that white expanse with her. But he began to feel better. His energy returned, if a bit slowly. He could not think, his thoughts were a swirling mess. He was not truly aware of his actions. Yet, he did not need to think, in order to aid. He had only been fully aware once, the other part of him waning in the binding of his consciousness. It was brief, when he had been his closest to waking. A time when his energy was nearly replenished and he had felt better than he ever had. Better than ever. Better even than when he had a giant bowl of Ichiraku ramen. Man, Ba-chan was going to flip if he ever Pain. Lord give me strength. What is it? Dear Heavenly Father, I may die this day in your na. The voice was snuffed out prematurely. He was aware of the pain and suffering. He could think after all this time. The cause was a beast, much like the one he had faced in his own world, created by the earth's will and hatred for the blood that had been spilt. It was raging across the land, destroying without purpose, razing villages without remorse, slaughtering and spilling more and more blood in its hypocrisy. It was short-lived, as the other part of him offered a solution. Everything he had left, in exchange to stop the rampaging beast and its conquest. It wasn't much of a choice for him, as he would have done it regardless. And so the beast was sealed. And so his thoughts were once again clouded. And so he once again fell into his slumber. It was the day that the other part of him had disappeared. Once again in an act of self-sacrifice. Dear Father in heaven, we praise thy name. And so it went on, time blurring in his haze. Floating, floating, until he heard a familiar voice. Don't worry kid, we're coming. Then he heard roaring, crumbling. Awareness of his surroundings, his body was replenished. He had begun to awake. An influx of power from 9 different sources flowed into him. He began to feel the stone his arms were rested upon. The weariness held within his eyes was being banished. Light began to peek through his eyelids, as he noticed he was hunched over. Another voice, Father? And he opened his eyes. Ugh, my head. For the first time in many millennia, Naruto moved. It was a simple action, he merely raised his hand to his forehead. Yet to those present, it was the greatest sign of hope they had seen from him in years. Today was definitely not his day. The last thing he remembered, he'd been falling after he lost sight of Kagaya, and then he woke up with the biggest headache of his life. Great way to start his day. His mind caught up with what he had just thought. Wait. If I feel pain, then I guess I'm not dead. Neat. He had honestly thought that he was going to die back there. With all of the desolate wasteland and existence erasing and whatnot. I shouldn't have been out that long then. He then began to think about the only other person he could. Maybe I can still find Kagaya and give her a hand. If I didn't kick the bucket, there's no way she did. He would have guessed the others back home would have called him crazy for that last thought. He could see it, Ba-chan plowing her fist into his head. Kakashi-sensei admonishing him like he was a kid. Sasuke would definitely try to kill him for that. But he had shown her something that he believed had changed her for the better. He had shown her his heart. And she had shown hers to him. That Ninshu stuff Super Gramps Sage had told him about really kicked ass. So even after all she had done, he had forgiven her. He heard a gruff laugh in his head. He recognized it, much to his excitement and chagrin. Hey Runt, enjoying your little daydreams there? He could imagine the fanged grin perfectly, complete with amused red eyes. So, you speak up now of all times, Furball? Speaking of which, where are the others? His mind was assaulted with 8 more voices, and his smile increased for every voice heard. Damn it, he was not going to cry. Gang's all here then, eh Kurama? But I can't see you guys like I usually do. He frowned at that. The tailed beasts had lived hard lives, so he didn't like it when he couldn't feel them in his seal, not even Kurama to his surprise. Kid, I can't tell you how great it is to see you, even if I had to deal with hearing every pitiful thought in your head. God damn it, he missed this. As strange as that sounded. Seriously though, where was everybody? Look up and open your eyes. And so he did. His face became a beacon of joy as he saw each of them. Shukaku gave his signature maniacal grin. Matabi raised her paw in greeting. Isobu grunted, releasing a slight mist of water. Son Goku pounded a fist to his chest. Kakuo lowered her head in respect. Seiken bubbled a greeting, easily understood by him. Chomei just kept chanting his usual cry of, lucky. Gyuki waved in a civilized manner. Kurama merely smirked at him, his eyes betraying his attempts to hide his happiness. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, at first achieving nothing as he reached to his throat. Throat's dry. Note to self, find water as soon as possible. Then we can go. He was interrupted. Once again, he heard a voice. A beautiful one. Ah, golden blonde hair that cascaded in waves down her back. Lips pursed together in fearful hope and a bit of desperation. The features of her face were soft and delicate, whereas her body could be described as sinful, clothed in flowing robes of white. She was easily the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Father. To say that the sacred beasts were impressive was an understatement. They were beyond that, magnificent, powerful. Yet, here they were, in all of their glory. Circled around the ruined temple, all focusing on someone he felt was familiar. Indeed, this was the scene Michael and his sister Gabriel had found themselves in. They had been wary of the influx of power and energy that the beasts had given to the figure. It had been filtered from the oppressive energy that had once burned and destroyed, to a serene and calming power that was similar to whenever they had used holy abilities. So the way Gabriel's face scrunched up in confusion was understandable, especially as the beasts began to greet the figure. It was quite the spectacle, seeing his face tighten in pain, his eyes closed as he then looked to be pondering a question, and then he had broken out into a wide grin as he opened his eyes, head immediately turning upwards as he looked upon the sacred beasts. She saw as they each gave a greeting to the person. The pure joy she saw in his eyes made her smile despite everything else. And yet, she longed for those eyes to look upon her the same way, no matter what. This person made her feel content by just being in his presence. Just be near him strengthened her, holy magic coursing with power. Without a doubt, he was there. Father. His eyes snapped towards her, alight with the same joy he had held for so many others, welcoming her. It was all too short. As quick as the love had come, curiosity had replaced it, his eyebrows curled in confusion as he looked upon her. Indeed, his gaze had shifted from the ones she desired, to ones she herself didn't understand. But that short gaze, even if he himself didn't realize it. He had recognized her, if for a moment, and his eyes filled with love were indeed genuine. And were indeed for her and her brother. It didn't matter if it had only lasted a moment, because for her it would last her eternity. She had missed him so much. She had thought that he had fallen during the war, faded from the act of sealing Trihexa. It had pained her the most among the archangels, even as the others stood in solemn silence in order to stay strong and follow their Creator's will. She alone had broken down that day and openly wept in front of all. The silence of their Lord was soon replaced by her wails. Before the great armies of heaven, she had let sorrow overtake her, and had let loose her cries of misery and agony as she felt her connection to her Father cease to be. It had been humbling for those in attendance, seeing the cheerful and caring angel in such a state. But here he was, alive. He had finally returned. She took a step forward, all thoughts of the chaotic scene she had witnessed prior to her entrance to the temple forgotten. Her brother noticed. Gabriel, stop. She did not heed his warnings because she could not hear him. Father. And she reached for him. And then she did something she had feared she had never been able to do, nor that she would have been able to do after that fateful day. She embraced him. Naruto had always questioned his luck. Sometimes he had it in spades, to a point where he could pull off some of the more ridiculous pranks and stunts back home in Konoha. Other times, it left him high and dry in inopportune spurts. What else could explain all the crazy strong people he had fought? Yeah, while his luck during said fights would pull him through where his usual skill couldn't and he needed a push, he still would have preferred not having a terrorist organization gunning for him since practically day one. Man, the Akatsuki, how did it go from fighting them off to an eventual showdown between him and the god of chakra? Yes, his luck was weird. Now, faced with possibly the single most beautiful woman he had ever met currently running full force at him, he once again had to ponder his luck. Father. She just called me Wa. Oof. His thoughts were interrupted, as well as his lungs having the air escape from them, when he received the female in question after she drove straight into his stomach and started to hang on for everything she was worth. His voice also cracked, but only because he hadn't used it in a bit. Definitely wasn't because that had hurt or anything. Definitely not. His day just started and it was already like this? Safe to assume there's no way it would get worse. Then she started crying. Father. Father. Father, father, father. Each cry of hers was accompanied by the act of her burying her face further and further into his chest, each time wiping more and more tears as she wrapped her arms around him even harder than before. Due to her body, however, this was also driving him up the wall. His eyes became unfocused, his face became hot, and the world swirled around him. This lady was crazy. Alright, this has gone on a little too long. The blonde heaved himself into a proper position, looking down at his charge, before he attempted to put some distance between them. He moved his arms up and pushed. Yet, she was still there. He attempted to move his arms again. Feeling him pulling away, Gabriel's grip tightened, and she buried her head further into him. She was uneasy, she was hurt, she was sad. What had he done? He sought to voice his question, but no words came out. Then he heard her speak once more. Her voice was gentle and kind, yet so afraid of something he didn't know of. It echoed a little, as her words were among the few noises in the now silent night. Father. He didn't know what she was talking about. How could he? He was only 17 years old, damn it. His thoughts died in his mind as he saw her head rise up to look at him. She still had tears in her eyes, red and puffy from crying, and her hair was frazzled. Yet she had the happiest smile he had ever seen, as she said only two more words. Two words she had desperately wanted to say. Words that she had thought she would never have the chance to say again. You're back. His upper body crashed into hers without warning, as he wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace. Her cries stopped, her hands that had been clutching his clothes on the back tightly now relaxing. They remained so for a few more moments. Her breathing became less labored, his hands rubbing up and down her back reflexively in an effort to calm her down, to assure her that it was all right. The touch that had at first felt so foreign, now strangely had become one that he was familiar with. He didn't know why seeing her like this hurt him. This instinctual worry overtaking rational thought at every turn just to make sure she wasn't sad. It might have been a strange thing to say, but this moment, it felt right. He rested his chin on top of her head. "I'm not sure what's going on," he heard himself mutter, still quite not believing what was going down, but he found no more words would come to him. He heard a contented sigh come from the girl he was holding. "Damn it, Kurama, what's going on?" Still sitting there with the Gabriel in his arms, stroking her back on reflex, Naruto's head shot up, eyes wide in panic as he gestured his eyes rapidly towards her. "Do you know who this is? And maybe why she's holding onto me and calling me her dad?" He only saw the fox grin grow larger, tail swishing lazily behind him. That definitely means he knows. Then he saw the Kyuubi point further downwards. Cerulean eyes trailed down to where the giant appendage directed him, only to find what looked like to be a male copy of the person that had all but glomped him a few moments prior. He was also smiling. The woman in his arms stirred and he looked down, seeing that she was also grinning from ear to ear. It was rather surprising to him when he found himself grinning right back almost immediately. Her face went from happy to a face full of concern comedic fast, her mouth forming a ring as she seemed to realize something, then frowned. Apparently that was what decided when she would get closer as she popped right in front of his face. "Are you all right, father?" He flushed as her face full of childish concern was suddenly taking up his entire field of vision, so quick that he gave a startled yelp immediately and whipped his head back in surprise. Straight into the stone headrest of the throne. Thud. Ugh, that was gonna sting. It also had the effect of startling the woman on his lap. Oh no. Her fear was palpable, the air turning sour as Naruto held the back of his head, groaning, while Gabriel's face was a mixture of, "What have I done?" and worry, while her brother held his forehead, feeling one of what he was assured of was the first of many headaches to come. Not even 5 minutes of father being back and the first thing his sister does is this? Meanwhile, his sister was still sitting there, mouth agape in abject horror. Soon, she looked down, a pout and frown marring her features. Oh, he was going to be so mad at her. Her head popped up immediately at his groaning, as her hands began scrambling towards his head, holy magic coursing through them and soon being administered onto Naruto's head. All of this had occurred within a relatively short amount of time. However, as he was now catching onto, this woman hadn't left his lap and didn't seem to be leaving anytime soon. A soothing sensation found its way to where his head had connected with the stone, and almost immediately felt any pain and discomfort vanish in an instant. Lifting up his hand from his eye, he saw that the strange, golden-haired woman from before was, indeed, still planted in his lap. She was also looking so adorable, fussing the way she was, face set in a worried line as she saw him staring. It should be impossible for anyone to be that cute. He raised his hand outwards. She flinched. It hurt seeing that. He didn't know why, but seeing her with a frown on her face, it didn't sit right with him. It was wrong, and he clearly saw the hurt and desperation in her eyes. He saw that, for some reason, he was important to her. What he did next came naturally, a soft upwards tug pulling on his lips. Gabriel opened her eyes to see nothing but the one that called her father, smiling as his hand stroked her hair. Ooh no, she hadn't even seen him for that long, and she'd already gone and done something like this. Her first meeting with father after so long was not going anywhere near as smoothly as she had dreamed it would. She thought, much like with what had happened earlier, that she would get a sudden sign from God. That she would go find him, only for her father greet her from some sort of doorway. She would hug him. She would tell him how much she missed him. She would tell him how much losing him had hurt. And then they'd go home, and she could finally tell her brother that she had been right and that God wasn't dead and that she and father were going to spend the rest of the day with them and she had head-butted him in the first 5 minutes. All those dreams of tear-filled reunions and heartfelt words. All gone. As soon as she was finished healing his wound, small as it was. She ducked her head down, seeing him move his gaze towards her. Gabriel bent her head further downward in shame. What if he had been watching all this time? What if he had seen her break down when he went away? What if a small sound like the landing of a soft object on the ground filled her ears? Warmth. A nice warmth had landed on top of her head, as her fears melted away in its gentle touch. She looked up, seeing nothing but adoration and kindness in his eyes. It hadn't mattered that she'd hurt him. It hadn't mattered that she had come barreling into him without stopping to think if he was all right after all these years. He was sitting right there, rubbing her head affectionately, and a gentle curve upon his face. His smile grew when he saw her questioning look, delighting in her confusion. Tears once again welled up in her eyes, as she turned her head downwards demurely and accepted his touch. This was worth everything. It wasn't the reunion of her dreams. It was messy. It was confusing. It was full of problems. It was perfect. And that was precisely why Michael let his sister take her time. She deserved this. He had bled for this moment. He had worked so hard, just to see if their father would ever come back to them, that him and Gabriel could have this moment. And that his father would be proud of him when he came back. God's system was made for the protection and betterment of humanity. But he wasn't God. He was Michael, archangel and seraph of heaven. But he wouldn't ever be God. Running the system wasn't an easy task. To filter in all the prayers in the world in real time was exhausting, even for a short while. Yet, he had to lead at his disappearance. Many sleepless nights were dedicated to keeping the system in check, and many more were spent keeping his father's passing a secret from many members of the church. But he didn't have to hide the truth anymore. Because God wasn't dead. There he was, sitting with and indulging his sister, as he could see a small smile form on her face. Even if he didn't look like he thought he would. Even if he looked young, dressed in strange and unfamiliar garb. Even if the Lucifers themselves had declared war in that moment. He wouldn't care. He was just so happy to have his father back. Naruto didn't think that petting a girl's head would be this cathartic. Even if she did tackle him out of nowhere, cry into his shirt, basically throttle him, and cry some more. Let's also not forget the part where she called him father. He didn't even question it when he asked himself if she was safe to be around. Although, he supposed that if she wasn't safe to be around, then the Biju wouldn't have allowed her to do this. Was Kurama trying to punk him or something? No, right? Oi, furball, the young Uzumaki began, still not removing Gabriel from his grasp. Do you know what's going on here? No response. Kurama, nothing. Come on, Chome, Yuki, anybody? At least tell me what the whole father thing is about. Peeved. His eye twitched in annoyance. Lip turning into an irritated grin, as his eyes glowed sharply. Shukaku, you overgrown sandcastle, I heard that. Before his tirade could truly begin, he turned to see the blonde in his arms look at him inquisitively. Father, is everything all right? Her eyes followed his towards the giant animals surrounding them. Are you friends with the sacred beasts, father? Curious eyes glanced towards him, then back at the Biju. If you are, where were they before? The eye twitch Naruto had was growing in intensity. And do you think the fox will let me pet him? Every single one of the Biju let out a bark of laughter. Except for one. Don't even tee. Then maybe you should finally tell me what's going on. The Kyuubi sighed. This was going to be a long one. Crimson eyes shifted towards the whiskered boy he had learned to call his friend. Strangely enough, the Nine Tails had also not called the woman he was with any sort of the usual derogatory nicknames he usually had for mortals. But are you sure you want me to explain? When you still have her on your lap? True enough, Gabriel was still there, delighting in his touch. She was so content that she almost produced a golden glow around her, lightly giggling as Naruto's hand continued its ministrations. Oh Kami, he was not looking forward to see what would happen if he stopped. But stop he must, so he will. He lifted his hand and her reaction was comparable of that to a spoiled daughter, strangely enough. Father Tilda, she whined, head tilting upwards to look at him, a pout on her lips. Naruto stopped moving, staring at her expression for a moment. Why must this be so hard? Sighing, he attempted to remove her from her current seat on his person. She didn't budge. Did she really just? Yep, she tightened her grip. This girl was always a troublesome one. Gabriel, I need to talk. His mouth snapped shut, even as the grin on Gabriel's face grew larger. Strange as though it seemed, he had known her name. Gabriel. As soon as he said her name, her grip loosened as her smile returned with a vengeance. Okay, that's enough, Gabriel. I'm sure father needs some space. A gentle baritone filled the air, Naruto's gaze shifting towards the man a slight distance away from him. His charge stirred in his arms, but Michael, the pseudo-ruler of heaven's palm, once again found purchase on his forehead. No buts, Gabriel. You can always talk with him later. I'm sure he's a bit tired still. The male's eyes shifted to Naruto, an apologetic tone in place. Sorry, father. It was hard for her when you were gone. He had really wanted to say that it was hard for us. But he had to be strong. He had been unaccustomed to showing any form of weakness. He was the leader of heaven. To their followers of his teachings, he was not allowed to falter in his duty. To lead effectively in his stead so that those who strived to do well and that needed purpose could do so. Even if it was hard, tiring, and grueling work. But he had been keeping up this persona for so long. It was hard for Michael to put down that facade. Even in front of him. Tailed interlude. Begin. In this time of reunion and confusion, Kurama reflected on his time spent sealed. If one had to describe the feeling of being trapped in a white expanse of nothing, waiting to reform, then the Biju could give you 9 very different answers. Some of them took varying degrees of satisfaction in this solitude, some sleeping the time away, some merely meditating and reflecting upon the past. Some of them took this time to stretch out their legs and enjoy this strange form of freedom, spreading wings and using limbs to work out the usual kinks that came with the territory. Others, even if Kurama himself denied it, couldn't wait to see their mutual blonde friend once again. They had to wonder why they were separated from him, though. It wasn't every day that something could shrug off the efforts of a single-tailed beast, let alone the whole 9. It was like that for a while. Kurama had woken up in a white space, much like the one his Uzumaki partner had reconciled with Kaguya with. He still couldn't believe that one, by the way. He hadn't seen much of that exchange before his conscience had slipped from him, the fate of Kaguya and Naruto unknown to Kurama and his kind. It was empty, just like that space, filled with nothing but a backdrop of white. However, it lacked the whole, existence-ripping, portion of that space. It wasn't long after that Kurama had been able to connect with his fellow Biju. As it turns out, all of them had been sent to a similar zone, filled with nothing but white, although strangely enough, they could tell that they weren't solid, were not as powerful, and were lacking a physical body. So they discovered that they were reforming. Although, most of the experience wasn't protocol. Usually, reforming after having their chakra dispersed or Jinchuriki host killed, it was much like waking up from a long nap. One minute you're in a seal, the next you wake up in a cave somewhere. So they were reforming. But to what purpose they did not know. And that scared Kurama. The mighty 9 Tails was afraid that the only human he had ever called friend was dead. Why else would they be separated? So when he connected with the others, confirming they had similar suspicions, they had responded with sadness at the supposed knowledge of his passing. Some handled it with grace, such as Gyuki giving solemn remembrance for the energetic Jinchuriki. Some, like Shukaku, handled it with the stubborn refusal of his death. Kurama, however, shut down for a while. Naruto had been the first person to gain his trust since the Rikudo Sennin himself. His trust was not easily given, nor was it falsely earned. Time and time again, the Jinchuriki had refused his temptations, and had even forgiven him for the death of his parents. Something that he now called his greatest shame. But even so, he had accepted Kurama as he was. Not a tool to be used, but a partner. Naruto hadn't just been someone who had gained his trust. He had been his partner, but he hadn't just been his partner. Naruto Uzumaki had been his first friend. And now, faced with the possibility of the passing of the sole person who had earned his respect, he was at a loss. Humans were fragile. They died. Sometimes they were good, others bad. But they still died regardless. Kurama had been alive since time immemorial. He had seen many humans meet their end. But never before had he experienced any sort of feelings at their lives' end, other than relief. They were humans. They were fragile. They called him a monster. They denied him his right to exist. They trapped him. They used him. They were horrible. They deserved death. But him, he forgave him. He had called him partner. He did not deny him. He had worked with him. He had bled and sacrificed for his kind. He was benevolent. He had deserved better. So, faced with the death of the one human he had called his friend, Kurama grieved in his own way. With painful regret and an overtaking sorrow. But still glad to have met him. Time had passed in that white expanse. It could have been minutes, days, years, but there was no way of telling. But it was on a certain day that Kurama discovered something curious. He hadn't returned to physical form. None of them had. The rest of the Biju had pondered if this white world was all there was. The end destination to wherever Kagaya had unknowingly sent them. Maybe this was it, but this didn't sit well with the strongest of them all. Kurama knew that he still wasn't at his full power, even with the yin half of him separated. He should have reformed that side of him during the process if Naruto had truly passed. This was Kurama's first sign of hope. He further delved into this matter, clinging onto it with a fervor he hadn't approached anything before with. It took a few, he wanted to say years, but once again, time was hard to keep track of in this place, before his next discovery. It had taken a long time to fine-tune his senses to find what he did. Kurama noticed that day long ago when he had first thought of a probable cause. Since the Biju themselves were able to communicate with one another, something had to be connecting them. Much like during the Fourth War when they would commune in Naruto's mind, Kurama knew that there had to be some sort of central technique or similar place to link to. It had taken him some time to get here, but his chakra sensing had been strained to its limits each and every passing day, but he was finally ready. He had found a trail. It was faint, but it was there. An unfamiliar chakra. He began to concentrate. It would be even more years before he could locate the chakra he was looking for. It had taken much of his time. He had been in this one spot, meditating and stretching out his chakra to reach the location of the strange chakra he had sensed. Once he had found it, he reached a new problem. He needed enough power to establish a connection. So he sought his brethren. He told them of his findings and asked for their assistance. This was troubling for them. Kurama never asked nicely. He didn't ask, period. But it was Gyuki who had first answered his call, after snapping out of his stupor. He didn't have to question how or why his fellow Biju needed his assistance. This was about finding Naruto. This was about closure that Kurama himself didn't know he needed. After that, the Biju worked together. And in all honesty, they found the answer faster than he could have expected. Kakuo had brought it up not 2 days after they had gathered. If we haven't reformed as you think, then why aren't we at full strength? He had pondered that as well. If they were still in the act of reforming, why wasn't their strength returning? Where was it going? Where was it going? Kurama had never hated himself more than in that moment. A mistake born of impatience and childish ambition. He had been so deep in thought on finding the source of their connection to each other that he had never questioned if his power was even returning to him. But when he looked for it, he indeed felt it. A drain on his reserves. He had been sealed up way too long. If he had gotten used to the perpetual drain that Naruto's Shiki Fuin put on his reserves of chakra, and turning it into his own. Just like this new source. Draining his chakra, and turning it into its own. For the first time in a long while, Kurama allowed himself to feel hope. Hope that his mistake didn't cost him a chance at speaking with a long-lost friend. And so, Kurama had once again gathered the Biju. But now, they had purpose. A purpose they would fulfill. A purpose, with the full and terrifying might of the tailed beasts behind it. They formed a circle, joining chakras together in an effort to pin down and communicate with the source of this foreign drain on their reserves. They would get their answers. Crimson eyes went wide at an unfamiliar tugging of something trying to pull away a part of his chakra. It was time. And so, Kurama and the rest of his kind let their consciousness go with that piece of themselves, just like during the Fourth War. What they found, they would have never expected. They found God. Kurama noted that their new surrounding were no different than their previous location. Never-ending white, filled with absolutely nothing. Nothing except a single throne made of white light. And the blond young man that sat upon it. Unmoving, but very much alive. He was elated, happy that this human had not died. A force unlike any other he had encountered before abruptly blocked his path. A see-through wall of golden energy erupted between the human and fox. Rage. Kurama raged at this denial. He slashed a paw into the wall, but the wall did not yield. He smashed his body into it, tails slamming themselves into the barrier, roaring and using all his might in an effort to reach his destination. He found that no matter of his current strength could break this barrier. Rabbit-like ears twitched, a snarl escaping from him as he found the source of this disturbance. A voice. "You're all here. Well, I guess that's to be expected." The voice was strange. It had the underlying tone of multiple people, but his voice was dominant among them. Naruto's voice, ringing loudly over the others. "He had earned your favor after all. No wonder you wouldn't stop trying to reach me here." So it had been denying them entry before, when he tried by his lonesome. So either his power alone wasn't yet sufficient, or this being had deliberately wanted them. "All here, yes. Got it in one go. Wah, yes, yes, yes. This is my space after all. It's no wonder that I can do something as simple as read thoughts. Especially considering my current duty." Duty? To ensure his awakening, survival, and to ensure his happiness. Any other things I may do are merely a byproduct of fulfilling my duty. Steps echoed from beyond the wall. The Kyuubi shifted his head once again to face the new sound. The being was spectral in nature, one half of his being featureless and colored a light orange. While the other half looked like his partner. "Ah, confused I see. Let's see, how would he handle this?" The being looked towards the human sitting in the throne. It also did a pretty disturbing imitation of his thinking pose. "Aha!" The figure snapped, smirking as it began to walk forwards. A small rift opened up the barrier of light to accommodate his traveling body, shutting behind him. A pale imitation of Naruto's smile on his face. "I believe it went something like this, before I modified it." Ninshu, was it? A fist was proffered to the nine tails. And despite how much Kurama wanted to squish this vermin before him, he knew he could not. It had offered answers. It was not lying. Spectral orange collided with rustic red as the two's fists met. In an instant, Kurama understood. He saw Naruto and Kagaya truly attempt to understand what the other had done. He saw them understand, even if they didn't necessarily accept. But they tried. That's who he was. He would always try and understand, even if it brought danger to himself. It was his way of life. It was his way of living. He saw them part. He saw Naruto fall into slumber. He saw Kagaya impart a will upon a fraction of her remaining chakra, binding it to the Uzumaki with the duty of sustaining him and other such things. And thus, he saw creation. Banbutsu Sozo. Creation of all things. Plants sprouting. Animals emerging. Humanity and the strange beings that accompanied them. He saw how they adored his friend, those beings with feathered wings. How they worshipped him. It made him equal parts humored and horrified when he realized Naruto was being worshipped. Then he was just horrified at the thought of Naruto being a being on which they believed created the world, that Naruto was their god. He could probably guess his words at that. Guess ramen really is the food of the gods now, ain't it? Again, he was horrified. The connection was cut. The doppelganger spoke. "Now you understand, I presume?" Kurama nodded. "Perfect." The being began. "Then you understand by what I meant earlier?" It was now settling onto Kurama just how ridiculous the circumstances of this world's creation were. Plants were only created for oxygen and food. Animals were much the same. Oceans and rivers for marine life and familiarity. People only existed so that Naruto wouldn't be lonely when he woke up. Speaking of which, oh, that's actually a fairly difficult thing to do. Difficult, but still attainable. The reading thoughts thing was getting on his nerves. Now the only question was why Naruto wasn't waking up. Well, creating an entire sustainable world does take quite the tremendous amount of energy. Not to mention he was on death's doorstep when I first began my duty. It paced in front of him, frowning as it turned towards Naruto's unconscious form. He's doing rather well, actually. It was because he was so near death that I had to eventually find other means to sustain him without relying on his own power. Normally, it would have proved difficult to find the means to convert outside energies into his own. But it appears that he already has such an apparatus. The figure began tapping a finger against where its stomach would have been. You spent so much time inside of it, after all. The figure paced forwards, eyes filled with mirth as it watched Kurama's tails angrily thrash in recognition once the fox realized what the creature before him had meant. The Hake Fuin, the very same seal that Naruto's father, Minato Namikaze, had used to seal Kurama into his infant son. The seal siphoned off Kurama's chakra, filtering it and turning his chakra into Naruto's own. To top it all off, he had only 3 ways to be escape, 2 of which ended in his partner's death. Not that the Kurama of that time would have minded much. Over the years, Naruto had become quite the chakra monster back in the elemental nations, thanks to the seal's particular function. "So, you managed to repurpose my seal then?" The figure seemed startled by Kurama's voice, not seemingly ready for the powerful rumbles that hung in the air once the Kyuubi had finally been able to get in a word without the mind reading. It was silent, as Kurama pondered as to what could have been changed. The seal was designed to house him and give Naruto some of his power, so now that he was free from it, he had no connection to his Jinchuriki anymore. So how was Naruto still alive? Somehow, this remnant of Kaguya's chakra had sustained him without the chakra of a Biju that every Jinchuriki needed to remain alive. But for some reason, it had sounded like it had needed the Hake Fuin for its plans, even though it was now essentially useless. The seal no longer housed him, and the figure had made it sound like it had known that the Biju were still in existence, so he didn't need Kurama and the others for his duty. That left only one possible reason as to why he needed the seal to ensure Naruto's survival. "Ah, so that was it. You're using the Hake Fuin to siphon off energy so the brat can recover." Rabbit-like ears twitched in annoyance at the grin that seemed to know everything, yet revealed nothing. Then Kurama came to a conclusion. And he snapped. The entity's smile was dropped as the full killing intent of the 9 tails crashed down on him. Ruby eyes with a void black slit narrowed as his maw stretched wide, showing rows of lance-like teeth, snarling at his sudden conclusion. It soon turned into a roar that was soon echoed by his brethren. "You're also using him." The wall of force that the figure had stepped through sprouted to life once again, surrounding it and protecting it from Kurama's paw. A massive quake shook the air around the area. But there was not a dent to be found, no sign of any sort of damage to be had. This did not stop him. He continued his assault, not noticing the other beasts soon joining him and contributing to his endeavor. It may have been a futile effort, but it was something that they could not fail in. They had known what it was like to be used. To be kept locked up and forced to watch as they were forced to give up the precious chakra that formed their very existence. To be exploited. They knew what it was like to be used. And they refused to let Naruto fall prey to that. Yet, the shield would not break. And there the figure stood still, eyes slowly getting narrower with each blow being absorbed. And with each blow, a little more time was needed for his duty to be completed. "Will." A tail made of blue fire deflected off to the side. "You." A pressurized jet of water doused the ground at its feet. "Stop." The remnant heard silence, the attack ceasing. A sigh of relief escaped its lips, eyes turning upwards, and mouth open to continue the explanation it had so delicately prepared. He then saw the 9 Bijudama that were speeding towards him. A massive explosion engulfed the area where the remnant once was. And once the smoke cleared, the shield was still standing. And the figure stood there irate. "Stop wasting so much damn energy, ya stupid bunny-eared furball." The exclamation betrayed every mannerism it had portrayed before. Before, it was calm, calculated, and in control. Its voice was even and had never been anything but a calm and quiet tone. Now, it was standing in the same place, an irritated scowl on its face, arm outstretched and finger pointing at the pseudo-leader of the Biju. Its voice much rougher and less sophisticated. Confusion spread across its features, soon being replaced with a look of despair as it realized its outburst. It waited a few moments before gathering itself, features becoming neutral and arm returning to its side. I apologize for my outburst. It seems my patience is still lacking." It coughed into its hand, before gesturing to the Biju. "It gets hard to suppress that part of my being. The more emotional part. His part." Its features schooled, the shield faded, leaving it to continue. "I believe I was offering an explanation to your questions, before I was interrupted." Seeing no other alternative, the beasts complied. It was a hard pill to swallow, but they admitted to themselves that whatever this being had at his disposal, they could not break through. So they listened. "Thank you. Chakra, if it were to grow powerful enough, could effectively capture a person's essence and personality, and transcend the limitations of death. Such was the case with Indra and Ashura. And such was the case of the mysterious being whose very existence was born from will and chakra alone. When I was created for my purpose, Kaguya gave Naruto a piece of her chakra. I'm actually very much like that black Zetsu creature you encountered. I, unlike my ill-intentioned predecessor who was just hers alone, adapted to his chakra as I was accepted by his body." Lips turning into a thin line, it continued, Over time, as I went further and further into ensuring his survival, I discovered that I had adopted qualities from both. But at first, I was a being of instinct. Little more than my purpose filled my mind. Survival was my main concern, so the world was created. Animals for food, people for interaction, but before all that, I had nothing to work with. My charge's chakra was low, and as a being of chakra myself I would disappear should my own chakra run out. So, searching for a way to accomplish my goals, I delved into his memories. Senjutsu was a useful tool, gathering whatever pitiful reserves of natural energy the desolate world had to offer. In exchange, I helped it thrive. Soon, the world as I had shown to you was created. But still Naruto would not wake. Whether a lack of energy, a lack of time to rest, or a combination of both, I couldn't tell. Then, I found a breakthrough. The Hake Fuin. So, I ask you this. The Biju listened. What was Naruto's strongest quality? A lot of things came to mind for Kurama. His strength, his charm, his luck, his kindness. But, if there was one thing Kurama had to say about the blonde Uzumaki, it would certainly be this. His beliefs. The being smirked. Indeed, his beliefs and his strong ability to believe. He would believe in the better side of humanity. He believed in his sensei's dream of peace. He believed that his world could overcome their hate and prosper together under peaceful terms. His ability to believe was both the first and final step to discovering my solution. It turned, arms now behind its back. Eyes narrowed as it thought of what to say next. The people of this world are weak, especially in comparison to some of the more outrageous existences inhabiting the world. But protecting them wasn't my job. But, their weakness brought opportunity. An opportunity that only occurred because I remembered something crucial to my birth. Something instrumental in the changing of Kaguya's heart. Ninshu. This creature had managed to use the original form of chakra use. A style meant to help understand, to empathize with whoever you wished. So what did he use it for? So I did them a favor. Fingers swirled to and fro in the air, the remnant's arms swinging from side to side. A miracle here, some divine intervention there, and soon enough they started to believe. And soon enough, with those first prayers, I was ready. And with those prayers, there was a price. I gave them means to defend themselves. Sacred gears, based roughly on the more sentient of the swords of the 7 swordsmen of the mist and the methods of sealing the Biju. Miracles in the shape of weapons. It pointed over to Naruto, his unconscious form still seated on his throne. Little blue wisps of energy flowing into him. A few modifications to the Hake Fuin, some tweaks for Ninshu, and I was all set. A near infinite source of energy for his recovery, and all I had to do was enforce his will. So, instead of harnessing Kurama's chakra, the seal now siphoned strength from the prayers of the people. He who had inspired so many others to believe, was now being sustained by belief. It was a feat anybody would consider impossible. But I'm still a part of him after all. Ninshu requires a chakra network, something I lack. Just as I relied on him for the world's creation, so must I rely on him for all else. He hears them, the prayers, filters them through his subconscious, adding to his recovery. It also serves as a buffer in case I need to interfere on our behalf. In a way, he is the benefactor and I am the tool he uses to perform his task. And so, the figure explained the various states of the religion he had established. Most of which, he admitted, was fabricated by the humans who had seen its acts, and only later had he intervened and established some core tenets by which they would follow. He explained the various races of the world, where they resided, and how they came into being. Heaven, hell. All the while, the Biju were slowly coming to understand the process behind Naruto's recuperation. They were surprised, however, by the white-feathered angels that worshipped him, and the closeness associated between the archangels and God. Ninshu had been modified along with the seal, giving rise to a new system. God's system. So then that's what they could call this being in front of them. No, he was only a small part of what could be called God. He was the object by which Naruto's will was imposed. Without the blonde, nothing could be done. The world would be turned upside down if this information came to light. That God was merely the byproduct of what was essentially a Zetsu performing his task. Michael's my favorite. What appeared to be a large mirror sat in a space near Naruto's throne. Watching with rapt attention, the majority of the Biju saw what appeared to be an angel with long blonde hair and 12 wings. He was chatting with others of his kind. Of course he would be Gyuki, he's probably the first sensible person you've met since leaving B. Bug Wings buzzed excitedly, but I gotta agree with our boy Naruto, Gabriel's the best, hands down. A gravelly voice spoke out, three tails shaped like a shrimp tail waving lazily behind a massive shell. You just like fun knuckleheads because you are one, Chome. If chakra constructs made to look like insects could frown, this one would. You're no fun, Isobu. Meanwhile, sitting on the sidelines, Kurama sighed. After discovering Naruto was in some form safe and not being abused by the being for some other purpose other than helping Naruto awake, the Biju rejoiced. Naruto was alive and was going to be back one day. They just didn't know when. The being explained that, even though he was the one who set up the current system, it itself didn't really know how long it would take. It was a delicate system, so there wasn't much that he could do outside of it to speed up the healing process. It was a good thing that the Biju were essentially immortal. It was also sort of a bad thing, because boredom soon set in. And what had his siblings decided to do in the meantime? Besides, everyone knows that Uriel is the best. Isoobuu. They were essentially stalking their blonde friend's family. Weirdly human-shaped hands slapped against his face at this fact. I'm more of a Metatron guy, myself. Another groan escaped his maw. Over time, at the prospect of talking to other intelligent creatures on a consistent basis, the being began to show more of the Naruto side of his qualities. Namely, annoying the hell out of him. What do you want, Will? Will. His name was Will, as in willpower, the name they had given him. Considering that he was born from Kaguya's will to keep Naruto alive, acting on Naruto's behalf for the world, and had a mean penchant for being brutally effective at getting what he wanted. He was a Will. He liked his name. Nothing. You ever think I'm not up to something for a change? You created a religion just to make your job easier. Will paused, before a satisfied smile formed with a twitch. I didn't really create a religion, I just didn't dissuade the humans from starting one. Guess even a pseudo-zetsu had an innate manipulative desire. And so, with eyes filled with skepticism, Kurama gestured towards his siblings with a lazy flick of his third tail. Could you at least get them to stop stalking my partners? What are they again? Will merely shrugged. He didn't know what to classify them as either. The angels, like the Biju, had taken to calling their creator father. Whether there was an actual blood connection or not didn't seem to matter. Would they be treated as his kids when he woke up? Nobody really knew. Great. Huffing, the great and mighty Kyuubi-sama plopped down onto his front limbs, resting his head on top of them. His eyes closed, his siblings' bickering fading out as he focused on ignoring every single one of the absolute annoyances that plagued his life now. A faint, gentle female voice suddenly entered the chamber. Dear Father, thank you once again for another day on this earth. The Gabriel girl was praying again. Thank you for once again providing sanctuary for those in need, for giving mercy even to those who do not want it, and thank you. Thank you for being the best. There she went. For some reason, her connection to Naruto was stronger than the rest of her kind by leaps and bounds. Only her voice was heard to everyone instead of just Naruto. And so, for what seemed like hours even though the others assured him it was only 10 minutes, the female archangel gushed about her day and whatever else came to mind. Finally, some peace and, hey, Kurama, are ya sleepin'? Kurama's hands were instantly around Shukaku's throat, intent on throttling the tanuki before he could use his sand too. Damn it, the nine tails cursed, as his brother's body fell apart and recoalesced a few meters away. The one-tailed beast smirked at his escape. You can't touch my ultimate defen. One more word and I swear, no more sandcastles. A sand hand rose out of the pile around Shukaku's feet, saluting as the tanuki stopped his teasing. If Kurama had a brain, he'd reckoned he would have died of an aneurysm after day one of being stuck here. They were annoying as all hell. They wouldn't let him sleep. Matabi and Sun wouldn't stop fighting and comparing flames. Why did Seiken need to discover impressions? These days were uncertain. These days were annoying. These days that he spent with the worst siblings he could have ever asked for. It was kind of nice. Tsunere, what even is that? Once again, Will shrugged. Kurama. All 9 of the tailed beasts were abruptly pulled into Naruto's space. The first thing they saw was Will. He looked terrible, and parts of him were just gone, but he still had one arm. An arm that was held out, his hand forming a fist. Kurama immediately pressed his fist against the proffered one. The first thing he felt was a lot of pain being passed around. A sizable frown took residence, eyes dulling. War. Those foolish mortals down below had once again decided the best method to solve their problems was to slaughter their own kind. Only this time, humans weren't the only fools who took part in this war. Devils, fallen angels, yokai and the other supernatural creatures that inhabited the realm. This conflict was this world's equivalent to one of the great shinobi wars. And it was equally devastating. Losses on all sides that measured too many. The world had had enough blood spilled into its veins. He saw anger. He saw sorrow. He saw the cycle of hatred that had once consumed the elemental nations now begin to sink its claws into this one. And now he saw death encroaching. A beast not unlike the Jubi. Created by the Earth's will, in an effort to stave off further bloodshed. But it would only work for a time. There wasn't anybody like Naruto around. No one to advocate peace should they survive the trial. No one to forgive. No one to be an example and give up their hatred. Will had not planned for this. Nothing he knew about senjutsu suggested the world could react in such a way. He was even more mortified to discover the method in which the world decided to cleanse itself with. He couldn't allow this to happen. So Will delivered an ultimatum. Let the world do as it wished. Or sacrifice all the energy he had built up over the years and seal the beast away. Which in turn would mean that Naruto wouldn't wake up for many more years. Kurama only asked him one thing. What do you want to do? He wasn't a fool. If Will did this, he would run out of chakra. He would fade. This choice was his to make. And soon, the choice was made. Do you really want to see him wake up? More than anything. Then we're going to have to do something really dangerous. And so a plan was developed. 9 anchor points in secluded locations around the world. 9 tombs dedicated to gathering energy. 9 temples, destined to be destroyed when it was time to awaken. But one of them needed to be close to Naruto. This was the most dangerous position. If Kurama agreed to guard him and become the filter that he needed, then there was a chance that he would fade as well. A chance that he would be gone, just like that. Even so, he agreed without hesitation. And so, he watched as what remained of him and his siblings were sealed into these temples across the world. Soon, he was the only one left, staring at the slowly fading form of Will. Kurama positioned himself behind the throne. He wrapped a tail around it, the other splayed at various angles. Soon, he and the throne both were gone. Now Will was alone, the culmination of Kaguya's desire to correct her past mistakes. The being in which combined with Naruto Uzumaki, made up the being known as God. And so, as he stretched out his hands, focusing on the massive amounts of natural energy rolling off of the monster of the earth. And he smiled. He didn't want to disappear. He didn't have a soul. Once he was gone, that was it. He didn't want to just be gone. He looked back at the empty space before him. To the space he was given a name. Where he had discovered more than just some sense of duty. Where he had discovered friends. Precious friends. Hey, a grin as real as they came spread across his features. Guess Naruto rubbed off on me a whole lot more than I anticipated. And then he knew no more. In an instant, the last vestiges of Kaguya's the last vestiges of Will, vanished. It worked. Those words were the collected thoughts of all the Biju, once they had awoken. And then they moved towards where Kurama was sealed. One by one, they arrived. One by one, they saw Kurama rise into the air, roaring for his release. One by one, they saw him. Kurama saw him, and was overjoyed. Naruto's eyes opened, going wide once he recognized what he was looking at. Hey Runt, enjoying your little daydreams there? Kurama could practically feel the bemused, yet annoyed smile on his partner's face. So, you speak up now of all times, furball? Speaking of which, where are the others? The other Biju voiced their greetings. Naruto looked up, Kurama seeing him for the first time in millennia. Gang's all here then, eh Kurama? But I can't see you guys like I usually do. Kid, I can't tell you how great it is to see you, even if I had to deal with hearing every pitiful thought in your head. God damn it, he missed this. As strange as that sounded. Look up and open your eyes. And so his partner did. And Kurama was content. Father, oh, the show was about to start. Tailed interlude. End. Blinking once, Kurama stopped his trip down memory lane. Seeing all of the mischief Naruto had got himself into over the past couple minutes alone with Gabriel. Kurama really questioned the kid's luck sometimes. A headbutt immediately after waking up definitely wasn't up there on the luck spectrum. But that was why Gabriel, even though he wouldn't admit it, was kind of his favorite too. She did dumb things sometimes, things that had amused him. A grunt to his side saw that Gyuki was standing, well as much as an octopus creature could stand next to him. The look told him of reckoning, of when they would explain what had happened to the boy and the world around him. Kurama agreed, but crimson eyes trailed down to where Naruto was stroking Gabriel's hair. Just let him have this, even for a few more moments. Naruto hadn't been able to spend time with his family back home, thanks to his ways of thinking back then. The least he could do was let him have this. Kurama, said Beast, turned his head back to his brother. You change. Well then, I had to spend 17 years inside of the runt before all this. I dare you to try not softening up a little. He still thought that most, if not all, humans were fools. Idiots. Slavers. But thanks to the kid who never gave up on him, he was willing to at least give them some benefit if Naruto was around. He looked down once more, seeing that despite everything that had transpired, Naruto was still grinning and still happy. Kurama didn't do any of this for pride. He didn't do it for anyone. He didn't do any of this for some sort of self-loathing for taking away Naruto's chance at having a family. He did this because he wanted to. He did this for his friend. His partner. He gave a short bark of laughter, getting all sentimental over one knuckle-headed jail cell. The great and mighty Kyuubi, Kurama, brought low and tamed by friendship and camaraderie. HMPH. Fangs flashed in the moonlight as his lips twitched upwards. How amusing. He was still petting her head, wasn't he? Naruto knew that this would eventually have to stop. It had to stop, right? Gabriel's eyes met his expectantly, a gleaming smile upon her delicate features. Could I talk to my... what would he say to someone if he wanted to talk to 9 giant animals of destruction? My friends? Bringing her arms from around his back, Gabriel bopped a fist into an open palm. You mean the sacred beasts, don't you, father? She received a nod, as well as a questioning look. There she went with the whole father thing again. And what the hell does she mean by sacred beasts? Gabriel, seeing him nod, got up and waited by his side excitedly. Ally wanted to pet the fox's ears. They were just like a rabbit's. It was so adorable. She watched her father rise. She watched him falter slightly in his step, before correcting himself and moving towards the giant 9 tails. So, Naruto held a fist out, waiting for the fox to bump it. How've ya been, ya goddamn big furry bastard? He only saw Kurama's smile widen. Then he knew why. Father. Gabriel was staring at him with her mouth agape in shock. Her whole world looked like it had just been shattered, as she shakily raised a finger at him. He could only respond thusly. Eh? Her eyes hardened into a glare. It looked just about as intimidating as a puppy. You swore. You swore. Eehhh? Remember kids, swearing is a sin. Michael laughed. It was a sound that brought all other voices to a halt. It was loud. It was mirthful. It sounded just so damn happy. And that's because he was. He never thought that this is what his father would look like. He never imagined seeing him getting admonished by his sister. He never imagined he would see him again. Yet, there he was, playing with Gabriel and responding to her childish antics with his own. This was nice. So with everyone looking at the usually well-mannered archangel laughing like a madman, it continued. And when he stopped, he said 2 things. Welcome back, Jesus Christ. I love completing a chapter. Sad that it doesn't happen too often, eh? Still sorry this took over a year to finish, even if it's still rough around the edges. There just wasn't a perfect way to end this chapter, none that I could tell anyway. So here I am, here with another chapter of Naruto, God of Headpats. Sorry if the chapter seems nor as good as before with all the stuff I'm doing, with trying to see if I could modify already existing Naruto techniques and jutsu and see if I could create a world. If you couldn't tell from the tone of this chapter, I'm just going to tell you that I like Kurama as a character a lot. He genuinely is an interesting character. Outside of Naruto after he finally accepts him, I don't think that there's anyone except the Sage of 6 Paths Kurama really cares about. It's interesting, because he would crush most things under his heel. He's interesting in the same way Death is interesting, because both have very destructive tendencies and limited morals, but both have certain things or people they eventually act kind and trusting towards, especially in Kurama's case. He tested Naruto for so long, yet eventually came to see him as a friend and partner. Goddamnit, that's a paragraph about what I like about it. Anyway, this chapter is pretty confusing, so if something's escaped you, here's the deal. Will, as some of you guessed before he was even a real character, was essentially a pseudo-black Zetsu created with good intentions. He started off very simple-minded at first, running at very basic levels, before developing traits from both aspects of his creators. He was cold and shrewd when coming up with most plans, because once again, he only thought about his duty and had inherited most of his thinking from Kagaya. After beginning to interact more and more with the Biju, he slowly began to show the Naruto side of his existence. What I wanted to do was set up a character that showed that not only can Naruto change people, but the people that he had changed could also impart some wisdom. And so, Will was developed. Will's plan for Naruto's rebirth. Essentially, he modified the Hake Fuin to absorb the power of prayers sent to Naruto through repurposed ninshu and turning said prayers into energy. Sacred gears. Humans were weak and Will needed give them a reason to believe in Naruto, or God. So he delved further into Naruto's memories and saw his encounters with some of the unique weapons the 7 Mist Swordsmen had, and then applied a method of sealing the Biju to imbue objects with the power of other beings, as well as gears that were purely unthinking tools. Now, armed with the blessings of their god, humans worshipped him as they carved out a place in a world filled with beings much stronger than themselves. God's disappearance. The monster of the earth, or Trihexa, was stopped by Will sacrificing all the power he had stored up to wake up Naruto, which also included his own. Since he was mixed into Naruto's chakra network, he doesn't have his own physical body. Without Will, Naruto no longer had a decisive way of performing miracles, and with that, God as the world knew it ceased to be. Long story short, Will can't generate his own chakra and can't reform like the Biju can. Goodbye Will, you beautiful bastard. The Sacred Beasts. A last-ditch plan made with the hopes of one day waking up Naruto. It was slower than Will's plan of God's system, but also ran the risk of Kurama being erased as well, due to replacing Will as a much less effective outlet for gathering energy. Once the other Biju broke free, they were to go to where Kurama sent out a large burst of chakra and converge on his location. Once there, they would give him whatever energy they had stored up through their time spent sealed, and he would then transfer it to Naruto. You know the rest. The issue of the toxic chakra Kurama released. Yeah, that's going to be resolved next chapter, don't worry. The only reason it isn't in this chapter is because it got way too long. Any other questions can be directed towards the PM box. This chapter was my attempt at not only seeing the first moments of Naruto's awakening, but provide a more logical reasoning as to why God's system was created by Naruto and Will with the techniques of the shinobi world. It probably doesn't make much sense, but hey, I tried. On that note, I just wanted to say thank you for sticking with the chapter. I know people probably wanted to see Naruto finally take his place up there in heaven and interact with Michael and Gabriel. I know that the whole Will idea will probably tune out some readers, even if he was a temporary construct in the first place. This chapter was boring, but hey, at least it won't take me another year to write the next chapter. Right? Cliffhanger time. Also, this next bit's going to be a thing I do at the end of every other chapter, depicting the many things the Biju did during their tenure in the Ghost Zone. Growing up, Naruto always lamented the fact that he didn't have a cool dojutsu like some of his friends. Sasuke's Sharingan turned his eyes blood red and had a ridiculous amount of things it could do in its initial forms alone. Neji and Hinata's Byakugan gave them near 360-degree vision around them and allowed them to see the chakra networks of whoever they looked upon. Hell, a good chunk of his biggest foes had wielded dojutsu as well. Rinnegan, Sharingan, fucking Rinne Sharingan, what even was that last one? So when he discovered that he would never get cool freaky eye powers like some of his friends and foes, Naruto decided to focus on the one thing he knew he could do well. The one equalizer that was his and his alone, not some foreign chakra from the beast inside him. The one thing that had won him fight after fight. He made Jiraiya teach him everything he knew to make his Rasengan better. Sure, the perv had him do other training to keep up with it, but every time he was asked what he wanted to improve on, he always answered with, Rasengan. So, while he returned a Chunin in ability, he had managed to make his ball of devastation into a bigger ball of devastation, and in his mind it was worth it. So imagine his surprise that even after all that, even after his eyes turned into weird horizontal and vertical bars when he used Sage Mode and the Kyuubi's chakra respectively, even when they mixed and they formed crosses of all things. They still didn't do jack squat. They just looked cool as an indicator of what abilities he was using, not the direct cause of them. If only he could light things on fire or something. Well, he could, but not with his eyes. But still, he could do a lot of other cool things without the need with said freaky eye powers. He was kind of the only one without some sort of eye jutsu during the final fight with Madara and Kagaya besides Might Guy at the end. And Sakura-chan. Can't forget about Sakura-chan. She punched the hell out of Zetsu after Zetsu, and even a few shots on the rabbit goddess herself. At least he still had the Biju with him. And these strangers, who now that he looked at the older male of the two blondes in front of him, kind of looked like him, but older, and one was using the jutsu. Seriously, he still needed to get her off his lap. Hup. Seeing as the female was still attempting to pull his cheek after his apparent swearing and need for atonement is the form of a swear jar. He then proceeded to lift his hand from her brow, staring intently at the male of the duo. An awkward shuffle filled his ears, head slowly shifting to the only other male in the room. His older-looking doppelganger. For some reason, the man stood a bit straighter, eyes looking on with unclear intent, but clearly recognizing something about him. He looked relatively okay though, his own roguishly good looks aside, as well as he couldn't sense a drop of malice. Besides that, the only detail about them he could really say for certain was that they both looked older than him. And so, thrust into a position of political uncertainty and general vagueness, Naruto defaulted to a tried and true method that had yet to fail him. He gave the most disarming smile he could, right hand in his usual salute. Yo, the name's Uzumaki Naruto. What's her name? He felt the woman in his arms stiffen, her body going rigid as the man nearly tripped forward. What sort of test was this? This new trial set upon him in his time of confusion? The Lord himself speaking as if some common teenager? Father, please, what's going on? Why take this alias, if I may, eh? He clamped up when he saw the loud stomp the boy had performed, arms forgetting their charge as she squeaked and fell to the floor. Naruto now effectively removing himself from the throne he sat upon. Oi, I'll have you know my very loving and awesome parents gave this one-of-a-kind name. I wouldn't go by anything else. Well, adding Hokage to part of that name would have been acceptable. Yes, he could make an exception for that. Plus he was sure he didn't have any kids. He would have had to find a girlfriend first, and he didn't really have a whole lot going on for him in that department back home. Eyes wide, the angel to his front had shut his yap. Their shepherd was an enigmatic one, granting both boons and plagues upon those deserving. They were taught benevolence, compassion. He was also equally terrifying when the need arose. But what was he to do about the current situation? To that end Michael had no clue. Their father had never showed a physical form before, rather appearing as a voice and compelling force in your times of need. Giving you the strength to survive your ordeal, so long as you were righteous. That was the way things had been, at least, before they had failed him and he was thought to be gone. Perhaps this was why he appeared now, suddenly, swiftly, and grandly returning to them. Perhaps this was a test of his faith. So for his lord, he played along. And so, he choked the words from his throat, even as his mouth and tongue betrayed him. F.A. Him. Naru Uzumaki saw. Call me Naruto, if y'all would please. Yes, of course. He gulped. What his father had asked of him could amount to blasphemy. His head bobbed back up, words forcing themselves through disciplined teeth, once capable of containing the greatest of the world's secrets. No. His head dropped once more. He couldn't do it. He could not disrespect the ancient creed that dictated the very existence of his people, lest they fall from his grace and be shunned from his kingdom. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. It was written upon his very soul, half expecting some form of corruption to emerge from someplace in his body. He would be judged by his father, his lord, his savior. About halfway through their little social exchange, Naruto noticed that the girl had clambered to the man he was greeting, quicker than he honestly expected. Welp, that was one problem solved. Thank God Kurama had his negativity sensing. Made believing people a lot easier, especially useful for telling people's attacks as well. Being a demon prison sometimes had its perks. Thing was, as weird as the guy was being about the name thing, He still couldn't sense a damn thing about the guy beside his own self-loathing and confusion. No malice or nothing, but he didn't really need that particular ability to tell the obvious. And for some reason saying his name was a big deal for this guy. So much so that he was refusing to say his name casually. As if something was keeping him from doing so. Maybe he was a little bit irked at the earlier name comment, or maybe he was just that nice of a guy. But being the infamous Uzumaki Naruto, he was now determined to get this guy to say his name properly, at least properly in his eyes. It was his name and anyone he wanted to say his name could. So he was going to cut the guy some slack this time and focused on the fact that the duo meant him no harm, they were only curious. The girl infinitely more curious in a weirder fashion, by way of headpats. He had made many friends. He had made many foes. He had made foes into friends, friends into foes, and then a second beating was in order for whoever did so. More than half the time, he ended up injured or messed up some way or another. And as it stood, he saw a way past that icky, "let me try to kill you, then you try to beat me up," stage of the process, so he openly took it. Friends it was then. The glare relaxed, the harshness and severity on his lips vanishing and were replaced by a smooth upward curve, eyes softening. He nodded. Michael was in deep shit. The first time he received an order in a few millennia and he immediately is incapable of accomplishing said task. When he dreamt of this day, in his more hopeful fancies, he received the attention of his creator, finally being relieved of his duty. But more importantly, he wanted the one thing any son wants of his father. In his wildest hopes and dreams, his father would congratulate him, praising him for a burden well held. For a task well completed. For a job well done. And now that that dream was so close to becoming a reality, he had just thrown away what little chance he had of that happening. Faced with the return of the one he wanted to see the most in this world, Michael's emotions came to bear, unable to hold in his pent-up frustrations that angels weren't supposed to have. His paranoia, anxiety, all those years of managing a system designed for a deity beyond his power taking its toll. Never in his life had he felt so nervous, so afraid of the reaction of the man in front of him. What happened to the calm and composed Michael of heaven? He had faced down monsters, enemy faction leaders, dragons even. Facing down each and everyone with a calm genius befitting a seraph. But in the face of the one he held dear above all else, Michael crumbled, the words his lord had bid him speak dying upon his lips. How utterly shameful. He looked up, expecting disappointment, harsh judgment perhaps. But instead, he found a bemused pair of eyes set on his form, a gentle and curious curl taking root on his visage. Just as the duality he had earlier described, he remembered the fondness he felt when in his presence, even now. That much was undeniable. The compassion and vigor he felt when they had first begun safeguarding humanity, eventually siding with them and gifting them with sacred gears. His was a benevolent lord. His was a powerful lord. Guiding the weak, like a flame in the dark. Warmth, assurance, permission, stand proudly for what you've done, and speak true your desires. The tears held within his eyes began to leak out upon this highest of honors, the smile on his face gently breaking the stoic visage he had tried to maintain. A sight he had maintained for a millennia. He would be the first to say his name. Off to the side, he saw Gabriel horrified. He laughed, his body feeling light. He laughed, upon feeling something etched within his very being alter. He laughed even harder, as without nary of a word, one of heaven's oldest laws had shifted. How delightfully unpredictable. His earlier joy rebounding off the halls around them. The archangel faced his father, standing with the pride and assurance he had earned during his duty. "Hello, Naruto-san." His hopes shot up when the third blonde in the room snickered, looking as though one of those Eastern kitsune yokai. Naruto's grin widened, as the previous negative feelings he had felt earlier could no longer be found. Instead, he could see the confidence and joy on the look-alike, still eerily similar to an old picture of his dad. "Michael? My name is Michael, and I received it from the one I admire most in this world. I also would go by nothing less." So the unaware shinobi crossed his arms. Naruto-san was fine. For now. Hey, now that's a whole lot better. Nice ta mecha Michael. To lift the spirits of those under his guidance in their darkest of hours. With a simple flick of his wrist, Michael did something he would only do in his wildest dreams. "Is nice to meet you as well." He waved at his father, welcoming him home. It then came as a shock when he saw his father stiffen and disappear from his sight. Like a flash, after seeing his look-alike wave back, Naruto internally sighed. Okay, no one's dead or tried to stab anyone, so I think I'm doing good. By now, he was mostly sure these strangers were of the friendly sort, the girl especially, so the shinobi let his muscles relax fully and began sinking back into the surprisingly comfortable stone throne. Considering his track record, he was on the fast track to getting a foothold in, wherever he was. The 9 Biju around him were also an extreme confidence booster. So, freed from the overly affectionate girl, even though he had indulged her without a second thought, he no longer had any distractions to stop him from doing what he had wanted to do this entire time. Closing his eyes, he let out a small, unnoticeable breath. Sage mode, I need a replenish please. Whenever he entered the fabled mastered form of the Toad Senjutsu, his chakra reserves and fatigue were washed away as soon as the nature chakra finished being balanced in his network. Later on, he could enter it at a moment's notice. And right now he definitely was feeling some unnecessary exhaustion that needed to go away. Chest lifting slightly, he breathed in again. He breathed a third time. His chest and body did not move. The sage began becoming a part of nature. So he reached for nature. And so, nature reached back. As soon as the two energies met, Naruto nearly let the training slip away in the face of this absolutely revolting hatred. But this was nothing compared to Kurama's hate. But it lasted merely a moment before it gave way to the pure and calming energy he had come to know. As if it had changed. Or reverted. Remembered? Just like the hatred before, did his senses change to something else. His eyes widened, snapping open to reveal the horizontal bars held within to the world. The sheer amount of pain coming from a distance away, the hurt, the desperation. His back touched the throne's own back. Voices once again assaulted his mind, bringing loud, desperate, and pitiable pleas. O Lord, let us be spared from this red plague. Whatever ails my fellow man, your children, give us the strength to surmount this trial. Please, 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 I don't want to die. I thirst your shirts her third, please. God, my son, whatever this red mist is, this devil's breath. Please cleanse my son of it. He hasn't the will to hurt a soul on your earth, so I beg you spare my innocent boy. Lord, the beasts have awoken, let them do what they must. Save my child. One word, spoken with the volume of a multitude of voices, were as one. Amen. The words softly left his lips, his body moving and jumping from the room through the broken ceiling. His oldest companion's voice nearly broke through. Wait. The voices were urgent, they were suffering, they needed his help. They needed his help. He arrived at the site within minutes, seeing a thick blanket of red mist that was beginning to draw back towards the temple he had come from. He recognized the energy immediately, as there was no way he wouldn't recognize it, after all. A Biju's chakra before being purified was absolutely drenched in avarice. The area he arrived at was a man-made clearing, an abandoned village behind him, the mist quickly leaving the last of the area. White tents and people being shifted around by men and women dressed in fancy robes. His eyes focused on the victims, some screaming in pain, and some had limbs removed in order to halt the spread of the foul chakra eating at their flesh. The ones still screaming, suffering from the multitudes of burns and flesh slowly being consumed as it spread slowly now that the mist had receded. His blood ran cold at the sight of the small forms of children among the tents as well, crimson leaching off their forms. His head dipped down. Amen. He remembered what Kurama and the others had been doing when he woke up, the tendrils of their chakra coming to him and filtering into his system, replenishing him. They did it to wake him. It had gotten loose. This was his fault, so he had to fix it. Another feeling that had come to feel natural to him over the course of the 4th grade shinobi war. The usage and control of a tailed beast's chakra. His eyes snapped open for the 3rd time this night, once again shifting to his needs. A cross prominently on display instead of the circular pupil. A light orange flame escaping and billowing around him and lifting him high above the air above is where he finally hovered. He saw all the medical camp's expanse, high above in the sky. The residents and patients looked on at the bright figure in the sky, bright cloak and arms growing from his form. They looked on in fear and awe as the arms began coming towards them. Once he had been accepted, he and the fox had become stronger than ever, reaching new heights. Nature reached for him again, and the cloak of flame grew in its expanse, becoming nearly completely white, with the orange appearing lighter along its length with the planer's touch. It exploded, hundreds of arms raining down gently and touching those that had been tainted by the hatred-filled energy. Red was removed from flesh, being absorbed into the flaming arms that everyone recoiled from at first, before they embraced the warming touch it brought along with the miracles they performed. Burns were healed, scars mended, limbs healed, and finally, as he landed on the ground, he spotted the young infant in a recent mother's arms, her face filled with the grief of loss. Her golden hair had lost its luster, her brown eyes dulling from loss, and stained with tears. She healthy as the others, but was the only one who had lost. Her child, her future as a mother, what else had been taken? So as the child was taken and cradled in his arms, did he ask nature for one last gift? He felt a connection to the babe's life, one deeply intimate with his own. The child held a spark of his own energy, as did all the others. Which should have been unheard of, unless these were all lost Uzumaki clan members. Which they most certainly were not, he could immediately tell that at least. So what was it? So he sent his chakra into the infant, searching for the familiar spark, his energy seeking out the similar something. He felt a dull thud in his heart, lines of fire extending from his fingertips, the babe's heart glowing from within. And so he pulled. The lines reached for the spark, tugging it along as Naruto pulled his hand away, hearing a thud again as the fire left the child's form. In a few moments, the baby took a precious breath of air. Hoarse gasps of joy and disbelief escapes the woman who had witnessed the miracle before her, laying in her cot in silence, only breaking it when the mysterious stranger brought her child back. No, he was no stranger. He handed her back the life in his arms. And smiled. "Congratulations, it's a girl." She choked back a joyful sob, as she stared at the bundle now resting against her. She laughed, as the baby's eyes opened. They were a most beautiful shade of green. The flaps opened abruptly, a man running inside, cured of the afflictions that had him bedridden moments before. Cassandra. His brown hair was a mess, eyes panicked as he searched the tent for his wife. He found her, eyes softening and walking toward the love of his life, and the new life they had brought to this world, in a daze. He saw the green eyes of his daughter. Eyes just like his. Albert. The father settled close, as the mother began to look for her child's savior. He was nowhere would be found. Gone, like a flickering flame. Her prayer had not gone unheard. But she would tell this story to him later. "So, what do we name her, my sweet?" Her gaze drifted downwards, cooing reaching her ears, as she smiled lovingly. "Hello little." The rest of the Biju chakra had just about finished returning to the temple once he had returned. The others had stayed in their respective places, the Biju in their obviously coordinated circle, and the two lookalikes standing now side by side, looks of awe on their faces. Some sort of screen was displaying in the air, before they turned it off upon noticing him. They all looked guilty, as they should be. Though the Biju looked annoyed at the other blonde in the room. Which they shouldn't be. I'm the only one allowed to be annoyed right now. A lot of weird things had happened to him in the last 24 hours. He had fought in a war against his best friend's zombie great-grandpa, then fought his best friend's crazy 10-tails Jinchuriki uncle, then fought their shared great-great-great-great-grandma rabbit god. He was willing to take some things with a grain of salt, but bringing back the dead wasn't one of them. More importantly, people had been hurt in order to do whatever it was they had done. He wanted some damn answers for that. Ow, damn it. And judging by the looks in their eyes, they also knew what he was about to ask. The first to speak was Kurama, turning his head sharply to the right as he scoffed, "Don't look at us, kid. We told the useless monkeys to specifically keep people away from the area." He raised his head, crimson eyes glaring at the nervous duo of blondes across from Naruto, let alone let them settle hundreds near it. "Shut up." The giant kitsune actually clamped up a little. Naruto grit his teeth, orbs flashing in anger as he looked upon his partner. "You saw those people on the way over here, you had to. So why the hell did you let all that chakra out? You knew they'd be caught in it, so why?" He was angry, as he should have been. Those people had nothing to do with him, had no stake in his life. Whatever had happened to wake him was not worth the kind of pain he had seen down there. And yet, this anger he felt was only a falsehood, a safety net, to try and keep his thoughts away from the doubt and confusion he felt. How had he known where they were? How had he been and be to use that form? Where was he? What were those voices? Anger faded away, soon replaced by confusion. I saw things down there, machines, you guys. Down in the camp, he had seen some things in his stupor that he was coming to understand. Small train on rubber wheels, long-distance comms, and numerous medicinal wonders. On the state he was in, he could see all of it in fine detail. He did something he knew only a select few could do. A newborn kid died, Kurama. The fox had the decency to flinch. He should have known that even if it could be fixed later, it would have angered his friend that people had gotten caught in the crossfire. But I brought them back. Another doubt. Another image of the foes he had faced. An image of a sickly man with faded red hair. Life support being the only thing keeping him attached to the mortal plane. This anger, this confusion, ate away at him. His body, refreshed from the chakra he had received. And his mind, tired and desperate from its experiences in the void that had tried to tear it asunder, and the voices he had yet to understand. Multiple sets of eyes widened at the influx of Biju and nature chakra. They were awed into silence by what they saw. Kurama, guys, his chakra was. The energy flared, flowing from his system, Biju chakra currently circulating through his chakra network, given to him recently by all of the 9. His chakra, when he had first felt upon the first moments of waking, was almost non-existent, but was soon being replenished by something on the outside. It had refilled his reserves to the brim. At a certain point, his network began producing the purified Biju chakra on its own. He only realized this moments later, naturally assuming that Kurama was there as he always had been back during the event. Whatever had compelled him back then was enough to rival the power of the 9 tails. Power that began to once again build as the voices returned to his mind. Thank you for answering our prayers. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen. The voices grew in his head, drawing him towards the stone throne in front of him. Turning upon them, the beasts felt guilt as they stared into the familiar cross-shaped eyes, white cloak of flames billowing around him. What's going on? And the Rinnegan held within them. Then they shouted in worry as it faded, and the boy dropped to the floor before he could reach his destination. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.